say fight back!
So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, et cetera, not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters. Not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskensen Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. It is Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, although we do have a couple of special treats for you in about a half hour. Chad Nicholson from CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, is going to drop by. There's some fascinating new stuff about how corporate interests and the politicians who serve them are retaining power. And in our second hour, California Congressman Khanna will be taking your calls for the entire hour. We'll do a national town hall meeting with the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And let's see, in our third hour, we're back to Anything Goes Friday. So, whatever you'd like to talk about, be it, Donald Trump or UFOs, here we go. It's, whatever's on your mind, we can take your calls today. But there's a couple of things on my mind that I wanted to share with you. And the first is, consider for a moment the election of 1988. Mike Dukakis, the Democratic governor of Massachusetts, and generally regarded as a good and decent man, who was not, some sort of flaming liberal. He was somewhat progressive, but, by today's standards, you would consider him a corporate or a conservative Democrat. But, generally regarded as a pretty decent guy. was running against George Herbert Walker Bush, the vice president in the Reagan administration. And now everybody's making, like, oh my God, everything's wonderful. Look at this. Donald Trump is being beaten by Joe Biden by 11 points, by 12 points, by 9 points, by 13 points, in all these polls. You know how far Dukakis was ahead of George Herbert Walker Bush just a few weeks before the election in 1988? Just a few weeks. 17%. He was totally kicking ass. 17%. And then, of course, what happened? George Bush started running ads prepared by Lee Atwater that showed a black killer and rapist, Willie Horton, and falsely lying. I mean, literally lying. Willie Horton had been released under a program that was started by the previous governor, who was a Republican. Michael Dukakis had nothing to do with it. But the ads that Lee Atwater and George H.W. Bush's campaign put together argued that it was Mike Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts, who let this black rapist and killer out of prison. And of course, he then raped and murdered a young white woman. And oh my God! And we got George Herbert Walker Bush as president. So let us not rest on our laurels, huh? Let us not think we've got this thing in the bag. Number one. Number two, I'm curious, what do you think is the number one lie that Donald Trump has told out of the roughly 20,000 lies he's told in the last 3.5 years? What do you think? What is number one in your book? Just curious. I'll tell you my nominee for that in our third hour. A few other things in the news that I think are worth A, you knowing, and B, my mentioning, so that we can talk about them today, if you choose. Last night, in the dark of night, the Trump administration made another pitch to the Supreme Court. Now, keep in mind, 2 years ago, a conservative group joined with a bunch of elected Republicans, and I believe it's either 17 or 20 state attorneys general and or governors, all Republican states around the country, including Greg Abbott and his friends, and his attorney general, the governor of Texas, the governor of Florida, the guy. I mean, just pick your poison, right? They all joined together in a lawsuit before the Supreme Court, in which they made the argument that Obamacare was dead. They said no further analysis is necessary once this is the Justice Department last night. This is Bill Barr's Justice Department last night on behalf of Donald Trump and the White House. No further, saying this to the Supreme Court, no further analysis, of whether Obamacare is constitutional or not is necessary once the individual mandate and the guaranteed issue and community rating provisions are invalidated, which has already happened, by the way. The remainder of the ACA cannot survive. So 20 million people who are currently on Obamacare, and all of us who are getting health insurance from private for-profit companies, which even includes people on Medicare who have bought Medicare Medigap programs to fill in that 20% hole that the Republicans demanded as the price for Lyndon Johnson passing Medicare back in '67. All of us will lose our protections against losing our insurance because of pre-existing conditions. All of us will be at risk of insurance companies saying, nah, we're not going to insure you because reasons. All of us are at risk of insurance companies saying, we are now officially pulling your insurance because we discovered that back when you were a teenager, you took a drug for acne that might put you at risk 40 years later for cancer. And therefore, we're not going to cover your cancer. All of us will be at risk if the Supreme Court makes this decision of health insurance companies saying, well, you've already cost us, $500,000 this year. That's our lifetime cap. Sorry, see you later. And no other insurance company, by the way, will pick you up. You just get to go broke. or die. All of us are at risk of that. The Supreme Court knows that, as does the Trump administration, which is why the Supreme Court announced that they're not going to make any decisions on this case. They may hear the case this fall, but they're not going to make any decisions on it until after the November election. Isn't that sweet? Here in Oregon, we're seeing played out what is being played out in large scale all across the United States. The Chamber of Commerce and the billionaires are hysterical that while on the one hand they are funding, literally funding, I mean, sign up for the FreedomWorks newsletter. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. That's the group that the Koch brothers helped start, that basically funded and promoted the Tea Party, and now they were the very first, one of the very first groups to be reaching out to millions of Americans and saying, open the government. It's time to open the government. Funding this whole program of guys with guns showing up in Michigan and whatnot. I mean, that was more of a militia group, a local Michigan group that was affiliated with them. Well, on the one hand, they're saying open up. On the other hand, they're saying to the legislatures, please pass a law that we can't get sued if we force our workers to come back to work because we've done away with their unemployment insurance by saying that we're open. Therefore, you can't claim unemployment anymore, and people come in and they get sick and they die, or family members of theirs die. We don't want to be held liable for that. We don't want to be sued for that. And that's exactly what's happening here in Oregon. Democratic leaders in the Oregon legislature have agreed to explore protecting businesses from being sued if someone catches COVID-19 on their premises. This is from yesterday's Oregonian, our statewide newspaper here that is published by a New York-based company. But they resisted a call from 10 House Democrats to join Republicans in doing so in this week's special session. 10 Democrats joined the Republicans on this, but the rest of the Democrats are saying, not so fast. Sure, we'll consider this. They put together a study group. They added blanket liability protections could disincentivize employers and others from taking appropriate steps to guard against the spread of COVID-19. You think? I mean, this is the whole sales pitch that libertarians and Republicans have for deregulation. There shouldn't be any regulations because if somebody's injured by the bad practices of a business, that person can sue. And now they're saying, no, you can't sue.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, it doesn't get more bizarre, more hypocritical, more absurd than that. We'll be back. And back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind today?
Tom, first of all, I want to thank you for the mask. I received them already. Thank you so much.
Oh, cool. Good.
Yeah. Regarding the question about Trump lies, I mean, there's two that I cannot choose from. One, that he cared about this country, and two, that he wanted the presidency, that he wanted to be president. So that's the biggest lie that Trump is living.
So
right
you
now.
you think his two biggest lies are, number one, that he wanted to be president. I agree. He didn't want to be president. He just wanted the glory from trying and barely winning that he could then leverage into a whole brand new career. NBC would pay him more for Apprentice. He could buy a television network, or he was looking at or starting. Yep. He was starting Trump TV, all that kind of stuff. What was the other one? The other lie?
The other one, the one that he cares about this country. He does not care about this country at all.
No, he doesn't care about this country.
He only
cares
cares
about himself and his family.
Exactly, his family and just fat in his pocket. But Tom, what I wanted to ask you about the Progressive Caucus, how powerful are they? Can they shut things down when they don't get their way? In other words, is Nancy Pelosi, does she fear the Progressive Caucus?
I don't know that the Progressive Caucus has ever. It's a good question, to ask, for example, Ro Khanna, who's the vice chair of the Progressive Caucus, in the next hour, and perhaps somebody will call in and do so, or for that matter, if I can remember, I'll try to remember to do so. In fact, I'll make a note. But I think that mostly they've tried to, because they are a minority in the Democratic caucus, even though they're one of the largest. I think they're either the largest or the second largest caucus in the among the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives. Okay. I still think that they're more interested in trying to play nice.
Yeah, because I mean,
they don't want to burn their bridges.
Because when we win the presidency and the Senate, I mean, we need unapologetically a progressive agenda. We just need to back that truck up and dump all the bills in front of Nancy Pelosi office, and let's get these bills out of the way. And that's why I wanted to know, do they have the power to do that? And I'm going to email Mr. Pocan also just to let him know. But thank you, Tom.
Yeah, they may. Okay, thanks, Omar. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Nastrovia. How are you on this beautiful day in Trumpistan?
Thank you very much. Do I have to cut you a check now?
No, I think I owe you a check because I just used your trademark signature.
So here's the deal.
Copyright infringement here.
I want to talk a little bit about the myth of the violent left. I've noticed that the right gaslights us. Every time they're in danger of having something revealed, they start accusing the left of doing it. And I've come up with the hashtag, tell me more about the violent left, and I've come up with over 50 different incidences where the right is threatening the left in some way. And I think you're the one that said that there's over 200 different deaths by right-wing extremists over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I don't recall the numbers specifically, but there have been no deaths from left-wing extremists, to the best of my knowledge.
Thank you.
There was the one Bernie supporter who shot Steve Scalise, but Steve Scalise is doing just fine, thank you very much. In terms of killings, I don't know of any. And that guy was just, a crackpot. He wasn't part of a movement. In fact, he was apparently mentally ill.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Chaz. Good to hear from you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour on Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 20 minutes past the hour. And Dennis in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Hey, Dennis. Happy Anything Goes Friday. What's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you?
I'm
my
well.
question for you actually is about supply-side economics. I understand the criticism that it increases income inequality and it fails to generate the promised government revenue through economic growth. My question to you is, what are your biggest issues with it, or trickle down?
Well, supply-side economics is a scam. I mean, that's my biggest concern about it. If you go back and you read, Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's book, actually his book Theory of Moral Sentiments is an even better book, about the deficiencies of capitalism. But basically, both of them point out in both those books that what produces wealth for the nation, what produces a strong middle class, although that's not a phrase that Adam Smith used, but social stability as a result of general wealth among working people, which is a paraphrase of things that Adam Smith actually said, mostly in Theory of Moral Sentiments, is wages. And wages are what drive demand. Wages, in fact, are so much drive demand. In other words, if you have money in your pocket, you go out and buy things. When you buy things, the companies that sell those things have to buy more of them. The companies that manufacture things have to make more of them. The companies that manufacture those things have to hire people to make those things, or they have to buy more robots to make those things, in which case the robot manufacturers have to hire people to make the robots, whatever. That you having money in your pocket is what drives the economy because it drives demand. And that's so much the case that economists don't refer to wages as wages. They refer to wages as aggregate demand, right? The sum of all the demand in the economy is the sum of all the wages in the economy, minus basic living expenses like rent. So, that's been our understanding. That's, Adam Smith, 1776, Wealth of Nations, I think it was 1781, he published Theory of Moral Sentiments. Then you go to David Ricardo, 1809. David Ricardo, one of the great economists, his Iron Law of Labor. and maybe it was called the Iron Law of Wages, but and he also wrote extensively on the impact of immigration diluting labor pools and the impact of unions. And David Ricardo pointed out the same thing. Wages are what drives the economy. Now, that was always believed to be the case. That was known to be the case. There's a million examples of that. Probably the best example is how Franklin Roosevelt got us out of the Great Depression. John Maynard Keynes said, if you hire, and the way that FDR did it was he put millions of people back to work, planting trees, building dams, just doing some things that were really, really productive. Other things, hiring painters, artists to do things like all the art that's in the Detroit Museum, the Detroit Art Institute right now, which is just mind-boggling. So, he put these people to work and gave them a paycheck. That paycheck then got us out of the Great Depression because it produced demand. And right. So, that's just like, Econ 101, right? And that everybody always understands. So what happened in 1980, in the early 1980s, in the early Reagan administration, was they wanted to come up with a rationalization for massively cutting the taxes on rich people. And so the theory was, if we cut taxes on rich people and on businesses, because when Reagan came into office, fully 1/3 of all federal receipts, all the money that supports all of, this is the reason why Eisenhower was able to build the national highway system, why during the Eisenhower administration we built thousands, tens of thousands of new schools, new hospitals, new roads, bridges, airports, all kinds, and most of this infrastructure we're still using from the 1950s. The reason he was able to do this, 1/3 of all the income was coming from corporate taxes. But they wanted to radically cut those corporate taxes and radically cut the taxes on the billionaires, and they had to come up with a rationalization for it. And so the rationalization they came up with was, if we cut taxes on these guys, they will produce more goods. They'll run their factories, they'll be able to use that money to hire more people, expand their factories, and produce more goods. Now, why would that be a good thing if demand comes from wages? They're not talking about increasing wages. So by any measure of classical economics, literally from Aristotle through Adam Smith through John Maynard Keynes, and we were still in a Keynesian economy in 1981, by any rational, that should be a completely meaningless and BS argument. So they came up with a new argument that said, well, if manufacturers manufacture more stuff, if there's more stuff on the shelves of the stores, then people will buy more stuff because it's available. If there's more supply, there will be more economic activity. And so instead of demand side, the demand side driving the economy, they said, these brilliant, the Stephen Moore was actually one of the big proponents of this, said, well, actually it's supply side. We've got to incentivize the job creators and the billionaires and the big corporations by cutting their taxes, and they will make more goods, and that more goods flooding our stores. And this is also the rationalization that they use for opening the door to China. Cheap Chinese goods coming into the United States. There's more stuff. Walmart is filled with more stuff than they had before. It's all made in China, but it's cheap, and therefore that will stimulate the economy. Now, 40 years on, we can look back and say this was complete BS. But that's the history of it, Dennis.
Right. So you disagree that you don't believe it's the increase in supply of goods that leads to lower prices that stimulates demand. You believe it's wages, correct? Could you,
by and large, there are obvious exceptions to this, Dennis, and the main one is innovative technology. When Steve Jobs developed the iPhone, he created a supply of something that didn't exist before, and therefore there was demand for that. But that demand could not have been met if people didn't have the wages to be able to afford the iPhones. So in a way, it still points out the supply side is nonsense. Obviously, innovation is going to stimulate the economy, just like the invention of the internet did, just like the invention of the car did. So, Dennis, that's the story. I hope it's of value to you. We'll be right back. Coming up on 28 minutes
You're
past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So we've done Econ 101 this morning. What else do you want to talk about? We'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Revolutionary Love by Michael Lerner, a political manifesto to heal and transform the world. This is from the introduction. We Earthlings need to build a fundamental change of consciousness into ourselves and in every part of our national and global society in order to achieve the economic and political changes necessary to prevent the destruction of the life support system of Earth, in order to end global and domestic poverty and wealth inequality, to defeat racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of xenophobia, to protect human rights, to achieve social, economic, and environmental justice, and to achieve lasting global peace. This new consciousness is possible and can emerge through embracing revolutionary love, the struggle for a caring society, and a new bottom line in all our economic, political, legal, educational, and cultural institutions. This manifesto is written to show you how this can happen and how you can help make it possible. Liberal and progressive movements need to move beyond a focus on economic entitlements and political rights to embrace a new discourse of love, kindness, generosity, and awe. These are not some new agey smile and be nice formula or let's get into self-transformation before we change society kind of thinking. I'm calling for both our American and global societies to embrace a new bottom line so that every economic, political, societal, and cultural institution is considered efficient, rational, and or productive, not according to the old bottom line of how much these institutions maximize money, power, or ego, but rather how much they maximize love and generosity, kindness and forgiveness, ethical and environmentally sustainable behavior, social and economic justice. This new bottom line seeks to enhance our capacity to transcend a narrow utilitarian or instrumental way of viewing human beings and nature, so that we respond to other people as embodiments of the sacred, instead of thinking of them primarily in terms of how much they can serve our interests. And also so that we can respond to nature not solely as a resource for human needs, but rather through awe, wonder, and radical amazement at the beauty and grandeur of this universe. I call this new consciousness revolutionary love, and its goal is to create the caring society, caring for each other and caring for the earth. The vehicle to create this new consciousness we will call the Love and Justice Movement, and eventually the Love and Justice Party. The revolutionary possibility of love is the kind of love that breaks through those distortions of consciousness that make it difficult to implement a national environmental policy or to end the many forms of oppression that permeate our world. To really embrace revolutionary love requires us to develop a strategy way beyond anything currently being given serious attention in the media, the political parties, and even many of the social change movements. And it requires us to move beyond what seems realistic in terms of the contemporary frame of discourse. Yet there is no alternative if we're to solve the environmental crisis and prevent our society in the coming decades from moving further and further into reactionary nationalism and repression of our own humanity. We need a global mobilization of billions of people to solve the problem, and this manifesto outlines the first steps to making possible such a mobilization. To understand the urgency, let's consider our current environmental crisis. In 1992, thousands of scientists issued a collective statement warning of the impending dangers to the life support system of planet Earth. 25 years later, in December 2017, 15,364 scientists from 184 countries signed a new statement that reads, in part, "Since 1992, with the exception of stabilizing the stratospheric ozone layer, humanity has failed to make sufficient progress in generally solving these unforeseen environmental changes, and alarmingly, most of them are getting far worse. Especially troubling is the current trajectory of potentially catastrophic climate change due to rising greenhouse gases from burning fossil fuels and agricultural production, particularly from farming ruminants for meat consumption. Moreover, we have unleashed a mass extinction event, the sixth in roughly 540 million years, wherein many current life forms could be annihilated or at least committed to extinction by the end of this century. Humanity is now being given a second notice. We are jeopardizing our future by not reining in our intense but geologically and demographically uneven material consumption, and by not perceiving continued rapid population growth as a planetary driver behind many ecological and even societal threats. By failing to adequately limit population growth, reassess the role of an economy rooted in growth, reduce greenhouse gases, incentivize renewable energy, protect habitat, restore ecosystems, curb pollution, halt defaunation, and constrain invasive alien species, humanity is not taking the urgent steps needed to safeguard our imperiled biosphere. End of quote from the scientists. And in October, well, it continues. The book is Revolutionary Love by Rabbi Michael Lerner.
Thank you so much.
When Josiah Harlan raised the Stars and Stripes at the outskirts of Punjab, the book Fierce Enigmas.
This week on The Science Revolution, about that happiness. Is it time to stop being so careful? Is spontaneity the key to happiness? Professor Janice Brainy is here on plastic rain pouring down in our national parks and everywhere. Tony Corbo with Food and Water Watch drops by to warn Americans the USDA is trying to outsource chicken processing to China and what that means. Tune in wherever you find fine podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. I do want to feature, though, one thing that is going on with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, our old buddies at CELDF, CELDF.org. This is the specific to Pennsylvania, or maybe more broadly. Chad Nicholson is on the line with us. He's the Pennsylvania community organizer with CELDF.org. The Twitter handle, by the way, is CELDF, C-E-L-D-F. And Chad, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you with us. The headline kind of summarizes this. I'd like you to give us a little deeper drill down into it. The headline, a new Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund report details a standard operating procedure of how corporate interests and the politicians who serve them retain power. What is this all about, and what does it have to do with the environment?
Yeah, this was a report put together by a colleague, Simon Davis Cohen, who did quite a bit of research. And it's an attempt from our perspective to begin to show how so many of the single issues that are threatening our communities actually have very common roots within the Constitution and the powers that have been given to corporations. So I think, a lot of folks have heard and understand over the years that corporations sue communities to try to force in, fracking projects or pipelines, things like that. It may be less visible that corporations are also suing communities over a variety of other issues. So the report details how corporations in different states have sued when a community actually tries to raise the minimum wage. Corporations have sued when communities try to put into place paid sick leave provisions. When they try to put into place more affordable housing, they get sued by, conglomerations of landlords. So the intent behind the report is really to, number one, help folks see that in many ways it doesn't matter what the issue is. The variety of issues facing our communities all generally get the same response from corporations, which is corporations then use their constitutional powers to sue communities. They sue under what's called the Commerce and Contracts Clauses of the Constitution. I know you've written about things like that before, Tom, as well as they have constitutional rights that have been given to them by the Supreme Court over the years where corporations have First Amendment rights to free speech, where they get to spend money to influence local elections and state elections. They have Fourth Amendment rights to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. And I could go through all of the different rights and protections that corporations have. But just to kind of sum up, the report is intended to really show that a lot of the different issues our communities are facing actually have deeper systemic roots, and that corporations have these powers and privileges and protections. And it's not just recent. It's actually been by design. In many ways, the corporate interests are using the system as it was designed by the 1% and are now not only using the Constitution to protect themselves, they're actually actively weaponizing using the Constitution to beat our communities essentially over the head when we try to do what's in our best interest in the place where we live. The last thing I want to say is that it's not just the corporations that have these protections. They're also using these protections when our state and federal legislature legalize certain activities within the state. So there's preemptive laws where the states remove authority from communities to, say, raise the minimum wage. And then if a community tries to raise the minimum wage, then the corporation comes in and uses the power of the state law to actually tell the community they don't have the right to do what's in the best interest of the community members. Last thing is that we've also not just seen corporations suing. We now have seen attorney generals suing in different states on behalf of the corporate interests. So it's not just the corporations using their powers. It's actually our own elected attorney generals being paid by taxpayer dollars that are being essentially privatized as a security force to come in on behalf of the corporate interests and get the local laws out of the way.
Right, and in most cases, and maybe all cases, these attorney generals themselves have to stand for election and re-election, and so they need the support of the big corporations to be able to pay for their ads and all that other kind of crap. So we're talking with Chad Nicholson, a Pennsylvania community organizer with CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, celdef.org. Chad, what do we do about this, and what are you guys doing about this?
Yeah, we've been working with communities mostly at the local level over the last 15 or 20 years to draft what we call community bills of rights. And it's not my organization going in and telling a community what they should be doing. It's really trying to listen to the needs of the community. So we've worked with communities to draft local laws that actually are about campaign finance reform, not waiting for things at the federal level. We've worked with a lot of communities to ban activities like factory farms, fracking, things like that. I think what's different about our work at the community level is it's about putting forward a positive vision for the community. So it's the community saying, hey, these are the things that we actually want to see. And then we work with them to ban the things that would violate and infringe on the community's rights and values. So it's about working with the community to actually pass these local laws. And then if they get challenged by a corporation or by the state, we then work with them to defend that challenge in court. But I think the bigger picture is that communities have to also understand their local law may not stand in the short term. And I think what we do about it is really a question for the people living in the communities and how far they're willing to go. So, for example, I was on the program a couple of years ago talking about Grant Township. Grant Township is a small rural municipality in Pennsylvania, about 700 people, been fighting off a frac waste injection well for the last 6 years at this point. They've been sued in federal court where the judge overturned their ordinance. Grant Township then said, actually, we're going to pass a new law. They passed what's called a home rule charter, overturned the judge's ruling, and they reinstated the ban. And at that point, they were sued in state court by the State Department of Environmental Protection. So it's not just the corporation suing, it's our actual State Department of Environmental Protection that is suing this community for trying to protect its environment. I can't say that enough times. But some interesting things have happened, and this is getting to your question, I think, of what to do about it, is Grant Township never just stayed on the defensive. They never just stood around and waited for these attacks from either the DEP or the corporation to come. They continued to stay on offense and put into place new policies and procedures to keep the corporate state off balance. So, for example, when I was on the program last, Grant Township had actually passed a local law that legalized nonviolent direct action. Basically said, we don't expect the courts to rule in our favor. We don't think we're going to get any help from our state or federal legislatures or regulators. So we're going to actually have to defend and enforce and protect our rights ourselves if it comes to that, and actually legalize nonviolent direct action. So there's a way of continuing to keep corporations in the state off balance, say we're not going to just accept the traditional rules of engagement for what we're told we can and can't do. We actually have to write a new script. We have to put into place new governing frameworks, and we have to really be creative and bold about how we're going to enforce these things. And actually, just to that point, a couple of months ago, in that same case, the DEP had sued Grant Township. They actually then reversed course after 2 years and revoked the permit for the injection well. We still don't know why, but just to say that all of the pressure that Grant Township has put on corporations and the state over the last several years has actually now resulted in a win. It was the first law that we're aware of in the United States, a local rights of nature law, where the state agency then actually used that law to deny a permit for an oil and gas corporation. Last thing,
was there a political change in the state, or do you think that they were being shamed into it?
It's hard to say. I think the DEP is under a lot of pressure. It's getting increasingly difficult for them to defend permitting things like injection wells just because of how toxic the frac waste that goes in is. As well, DEP is under investigation right now by the Attorney General in Pennsylvania, as well as the FBI for some pipeline-related work that they were overseeing. And actually, just yesterday in Pennsylvania, the Attorney General came out with a report talking about the DEP's failures when it comes to regulating fracking over the past several years. So I think it's harder for them to defend their actions, both in terms of how they have failed to protect the environment, as well as that they are actively suing communities trying to stop what are clearly harmful activities. Last thing I want to say is, we've worked with dozens and dozens of communities across the country on various issues. We do think it does need to move to the state level at some point, but that there's not going to be real state or federal change until there's actually the grassroots effort. So we've now had constitutional amendments introduced in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado, Oregon, and New Hampshire that are actually about giving communities the rights and protections they need to fight off these corporations and not constantly have to be on the defensive. So we're now working with these communities at the local level to build grassroots pressure for state and then federal constitutional change, which we think is where this ultimately needs to head.
Are you proposing, you just mentioned federal constitutional change, so your constitutional amendments are federal, or are you proposing to amend state constitutions as well?
State and federal. We're starting at the state level. And as I mentioned, we've got, I think there's 5 states that have had these constitutional amendments introduced at this point that we're now organizing around. And so the amendments are basically about the right of local community self-government, giving communities the rights and the powers and the authorities that they need to stop harmful activities, because that goes back to the whole point of the report. Right now, all these harmful activities, if the community tries to take action to protect themselves, they get sued. And so we have to, we basically have to rewrite in many ways parts of the Constitution and turn it on its head, because right now it is being used as a weapon. It's being used to protect the interests of the 1%, the elite, the wealthy, and the 99% of our communities don't actually get to use it. So that's what we're proposing, state constitutional amendments, and then we do have one for the federal level as well. But I think that's going to be a little ways off yet.
What does your federal constitutional amendment propose? We got about 20 seconds here, Chad.
Yeah, again, a right of local community self-government, that communities across this country should be able to pass laws that protect the rights of the people and the ecosystems within the community, and that those laws should be able to be free from state or federal preemptive laws, and that those laws should also not be subject to corporate interference and corporate harassment.
Good stuff. Chad Nicholson with Pennsylvania Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, CELDF, as CELDF.org is the website and the Twitter handle. Chad, thanks for dropping by. Great talking with you again.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Good to talk with you as well.
You're welcome. Anytime. Chad Nicholson with CELDF. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And don't forget, our entire second hour will be California Congressman Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour, and he really whips through them. And welcome back. Tim in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hello, Mr. Thom Hartmann. Thank you very much for taking my call. You are the man. I tell you what, I have a rock here. I'm going to ask, actually, I'm going to end with a question. But anyway, I have a rock here, which was built and, well, not built, but it was painted by a good friend of mine. And that rock is so much smarter than Donald Trump, you would not even believe. And my question is how do we get this guy out of the White House?
Well, there's this thing on November 3rd. There's a slogan around it that has to do with flushing something that rhymes with third. And, it's like, to the best of my knowledge, that's the only option we have right now because, the Republicans in the Senate have made it very clear they're not going to kick him out.
What about voter suppression?
Yeah, well, if they're gonna suppress 5% of the vote, we've got to show up 7, 8, 9, 10% of the vote.
Exactly.
We just have no choice right now, Tim. We don't control the majority of the states, and in the majority of the states, voter suppression is absolutely a way of life.
So basically, let's get these young folks out there.
Not just young folks, everybody. I mean, we have
everybody.
Yes.
But
young folks are the group that we know have strong political opinions that historically have not showed up for elections, and so
exactly.
Yes, all of the above. Yep, there you go.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Thom Hartmann.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Manuel in Houston, Texas. Hey, Manuel, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? Love your show. Anyway,
I
just want to talk about how the cities and municipalities need to renegotiate these police union contracts to where when a policeman gets in trouble, or rogue police, to where they have to pay the legal fees of these police officers, to where they have to pay the settlements of these police officers. Maybe that would slow them down defending these rogue bad cops, you know.
I agree. And in fact, the legislation that just passed the House of Representatives yesterday and is now on its way to the Senate, the George Floyd Police Reform Act, if I'm remembering the title correctly, specifically does away with qualified immunity and says that the individual liability for a police officer's act no longer rests with the city or with the department. And they don't even dump it on the union, as you're suggesting. They're saying it belongs to the individual officers, and therefore officers, just like doctors, who also have the ability to kill us legally, have to have liability insurance, malpractice insurance. And then the insurance companies can weed out the bad guys. It makes sense to me.
Yes, but, the unions are the ones representing them, right? And they pay union dues, and I'm pretty sure those unions, they have they're affiliated. They have millions of dollars too. Why do the citizens have to pay for the crimes of the police? We need policing. I'm all for policing. I just don't want bad policing. And one more thing. Now you're coming up on a break. Help save America from COVID-45. The only cure is to vote it out. And you mentioned something about Willie Horton. Willie Horton was apologized. I believe it was Atwater who apologized.
Yeah, Atwater apologized for that on his deathbed. Yeah, you're right, Manuel. Manuel, thank you. You're a smart guy. You have a good understanding of this stuff. Thank you. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program. And it's about the state representative, Timothy Gintner in Ohio, who has proposed legislation. It actually passed the House of Representatives in Ohio, HB 164. It's now going to the Senate, where there are 33 senators, 9 of them Democrats. This legislation, if you were to ask a student, say you're a science teacher, and you were to ask a student the question like, does the sun rotate around the Earth? Is the Earth the center of the universe? And the student said yes, you would have to grade the answer as correct, because the student might belong to some cult that believes that the Earth is at the center of the universe. Seriously. Religion trumps science in the classroom. It is getting so weird out there. Anyhow, you can check out all the details of it in our little video over at ThomHartmann.com. And thanks again for supporting the program. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. And we just, Manuel and I were just talking about, all this political stuff. And he brought up the fact that Lee Atwater on his deathbed apologized for the Willie Horton ads. Most people don't know that. I'm like, wow, this is a guy who has paid attention to his politics over the years. And a fine thing it is. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just want, one of the hopes we have is the rise in union membership. I think, basically, if the politicians are basically bought by the corporations up there on on the Hill, and what happened?
Thanks to the Supreme Court.
With Clinton came in and we weren't getting the money from the unions anymore. He started taking it from the bank. So if we could get strong union membership and people realize essential workers are essential, we need to pay them a living wage. I think $15 an hour. We need to go to 20. you know.
Well, it's not just the living wage, Jeff. If you gave people the right to unionize, you wouldn't have to worry about the minimum wage.
Well, and you know, Omar made a good point, and I hope you do bring that up to Khanna. Why doesn't the progressive part of the Democratic act like the Freedom Caucus or the Tea Party did back in the day? I mean, they hated the Tea Party because they would just say, no, we're not signing that. Why can't they have the oomph to behave like that? I mean, in the same sense. I don't know what they do. They say they're going to kill their kids when they get up there. I have some hope with that Bowman going in there. He seems pretty feisty, and I like that, you know. And
yeah,
AOC, it seems like they knocked her down a peg, and she's still out there fighting. But I just don't get it. I just, you know, so that's my rant.
Yeah, I get that, and I just wrote it down, so I'll bring it up with Congressman Khanna. And with regard to unionization, you know, most people don't realize Denmark, for example, has no minimum wage, and yet people at McDonald's make the equivalent of $18 an hour, and burgers are like 20 cents more than here. But you know, it's infinitesimal because labor is not that big a piece of the cost of a burger. But the reason why they don't need a minimum wage in Denmark and several other of these Scandinavian countries and Northern European countries is because they have something like 80-90% unionization. Basically, there's no need for a minimum wage because, you know, everybody's negotiating their contracts, collectively. And it's really working. Jeff, thanks for the call. Alita in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Alita, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm curious about mask wearing and facial recognition systems. We spent billions of dollars on facial recognition systems, and we're all wearing masks. Are they working still?
One wonders if part of the Trump administration's opposition to wearing masks has to do with some sort of fascist dystopian notion that they can replicate China and use facial recognition software to keep track of everybody all the time, everywhere. Although China has now gone to, you must have your phone with you and your phone must have an ID code on it so we can track you even if you're wearing a mask. But, to the best of my knowledge, one of the good ways to blow up facial recognition software is to wear a mask. Yeah.
Okay, well, I was just curious because I hadn't heard anyone discussing it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Alita. Great to hear from you. Yep. Thank you. Vince in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Vince. Thanks for listening to AM 910. What's up?
Thank you, Tom, for allowing me to put in my 3 cents worth. Inflation, and then my opinion is worth more than others. I wanted to speak of the issue of voter suppression. Most of the places where this is a problem, Republican-controlled state senate and governor's office. The only way to beat it is we have to counteract the voter indifference, the apathy. What is the percentage of eligible voters that actually votes in an election? And I'll take
depends on the election.
In
primaries, it's slightly less than 50%. In general elections, it's slightly over 50%. And in presidential elections, it's in the high 50s. Why?
Well, if we can,
you're saying we just need to get a lot of people out to vote the Republicans out. And that's, I get it, Vince, and I agree with you. I mean, this is the problem. If you don't like voter suppression, don't elect Republicans, because the number one strategy that Republicans have, that Republicans use, the number one way is the way that Republicans maintain power, even when they lose the majority vote. Right? The majority of voters in Michigan voted for Democrats. And yet the Republicans control their legislature and their congressional delegation. The majority of Wisconsin voters voted for Democrats, and yet Republicans control their legislature and their congressional district. The majority of voters voted for Democrats in North Carolina. In each one of these cases, they got a Democratic governor. It was a statewide office. But everything else, no, not so much. Why? Because of gerrymandering. And because of voter suppression, and then, but particularly gerrymandering. But voter suppression is what made it possible. So if you don't want voter suppression in your state, vote out the damn Republicans. We'll be back with Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events, that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Michael Lewis's new book, The Fifth Risk. And this is from the prologue, which is titled Lost in Transition. Chris Christie noticed a piece in the New York Times. That's how it all started. The New Jersey governor had dropped out of the presidential race in February 2016 and thrown what support he had behind Donald Trump. In late April, he saw the article. It described meetings between representatives of the remaining candidates still in the race: Trump, John Kasich, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders, and the Obama White House. Anybody who still had any kind of shot at becoming president of the United States apparently needed to start preparing to run the federal government. The guy Trump sent to the meeting was, in Christie's estimations, comically underqualified. Christie called up Trump's campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, to ask why this critical job hadn't been handed to someone who actually knew something about government. Lewandowski said, "We don't have anyone." Christie volunteered himself for the job, head of the Donald Trump presidential transition team. "It's the next best thing to being president," he told friends. "You get to plan the presidency." He went to see Trump about it. Trump said he didn't want a presidential transition team. Why did anyone need to plan anything before he actually became president? "It's legally required," said Christie. Trump asked where the money was going to come from to pay for the transition team. Christie explained that Trump could either pay for it himself or take it out of campaign funds. Trump didn't want to pay for it himself, and he didn't want to take it out of campaign funds either, but he agreed grudgingly that Christie could go ahead and raise a separate fund to pay for his transition team. But not too much, he said. And so Christie set out to prepare for the unlikely event that Donald Trump would one day be elected president of the United States. Not everyone in Trump's campaign was happy to see him on the job. In June, Christie received a note from Trump advisor Paul Manafort. "The kid is paranoid about you," Manafort said. The kid was Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. Back in 2005, when he was U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Christie had prosecuted and jailed Kushner's father, Charles, for tax fraud. Christie's investigation revealed in the bargain that Charles Kushner had hired a prostitute to seduce his own brother-in-law, whom he suspected of cooperating with Christie, had videotaped the sexual encounter and sent the tape to his sister. The Kushners apparently took their grudges seriously, and Christie sensed that Jared still harbored one against him. On the other hand, Trump, whom Christie considered almost a friend, couldn't have cared less. He'd invited Christie to his and Melania's wedding, and he pressed him to attend his daughter Ivanka and Jared Kushner's wedding. "That would be awkward," said Christie. "I'm paying for the wedding, and I don't give an S," said Donald. Christie viewed Jared as one of those people who thinks that because he's rich, he must also be smart. Still, he had a certain cunning about him. And Christie soon found himself reporting everything he did to prepare for a Trump administration to an executive committee. The committee consisted of Jared, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Paul Manafort, Steve Mnuchin, and Jeff Sessions. I'm kind of like the church elder who double counts the collection plate every Sunday for the pastor, said Sessions, who appeared uncomfortable with the entire situation. The elder's job became more complicated in July 2016 when Trump was formally named the Republican nominee. The transition team now moved into an office in downtown Washington, D.C. and went looking for people to occupy the top 500 jobs in the federal government. They needed to fill all of the cabinet positions, of course, but also a whole bunch of others that no one in the Trump campaign even knew existed. It's not obvious how you find the next Secretary of State, much less the next Secretary of Transportation. Never mind who should sit on the Board of Trustees of the Barry Goldwater Scholarship and Excellence in Education Foundation. By August, 130 people were showing up every day, and hundreds more working part-time at Trump Transition headquarters at the corner of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. The transition team made lists of likely candidates for all 500 jobs, plus other lists of informed people to roll into the various federal agencies the day after the election to be briefed on whatever the federal agencies were doing. They gathered the names for these lists by traveling the country and talking to people, Republicans who had served in government, Trump's closest advisors, recent occupants of the jobs that needed filling. Then they set about investigating any candidates for glaring flaws and embarrassing secrets and conflicts of interest. At the end of each week, Christie handed over binders with lists of names of people who might do the job well to Jared and Donald and Eric and the others. They probed everything, says a senior Trump transition official. Who is this person? Where did this person come from? They only ever rejected one person, Paul Manafort's secretary. The first time Donald Trump paid attention to any of this was when he read about it in the newspaper. The story revealed that Trump's very own transition team, led by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, had raised several $1 million to pay for its own staff. The moment he saw it, Trump called Steve Bannon, the chief executive of his campaign, from his office on the 26th floor of the Trump Tower and told him to come immediately to his residence many floors above. Bannon stepped off the elevator to find the governor of New Jersey seated on a sofa, being hollered at. Trump was apoplectic, actually yelling, "You're stealing my money! You're stealing my effing money! What the F is this?" Seeing Bannon, Trump turned on him and screamed, "Why are you letting him steal my effing money?" Bannon and Christie together set out to explain to Trump federal law. Months, and it continues from there. The book is The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday, although this hour we're going to do a national town hall meeting with Congressman Khanna. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California, more or less the Silicon Valley area, and in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. And you can tweet him at Rep, R-O, Khanna, Rep as in representative. And Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program. It's great to have you. A number of our callers in the previous hour, when I announced that you would be on in this hour taking calls, asked me to ask you if the Progressive Caucus plans on doing in the next legislative session the kind of theatrical performance art that got lots and lots of free media, or earned media as the phrase goes, for their causes, and sometimes actually produced results back in the in the 2010 and 2012 Congresses by the Tea Party caucus.
Well, Tom, I appreciate that. I think we're open to doing something. Were there sort of concrete suggestions of what?
No.
They think
it was just, why don't we see the Progressive Caucus on TV every day like we used to see the Tea Party caucus? I think that was the essence of the question.
Well, I think it's fair. I think the pandemic has made it harder, frankly, just for Congress to be as visible. I mean, there are a lot of people who are from California or Texas or other parts who are not being able to travel in.
who are having to vote remotely or with their districts. And so it's a bit harder. But I think having a remote virtual Zoom call and being more active and visible is important, particularly given the issues of our time, where you have extraordinary demands to reform the criminal justice system, police violence, have health care for everyone, Medicare for all. That is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Yeah, amen. And before we pick up calls here, and we've got a bunch of them for you, anything that you want to highlight or point out to our listeners you don't want to slip by here in this hour?
Well, last night we passed the Justice and Policing Act. It had Lacey Clay and my Peace Act in it, which, as we've discussed on previous shows, would change the standard of force to comply with human rights law and international law. Every other major democracy says force can only be used as the last resort. We're still going around with the sense that if an officer says it's reasonable, they can use force. And so if an officer says comply with my order and a person doesn't comply under the law, they can use deadly force. And that has to change. It's passed the House. Now it's up to the Senate. And there are other good provisions in that bill that passed the House. It ends qualified immunity for police officers. It ends chokeholds. It makes it much easier to prosecute cops for abuse. So I really think we need the continued mobilization so that we get something through the Senate.
Do you think that's possible? I mean, the Tim Scott, the Republicans offered a piece of legislation to control the police that basically said, please be nice. We'd like you to be nice. Here are our goals. And you guys are saying, if you guys aren't nice, we're going to kick you out on your butts, or prosecute you. But is Mitch McConnell going to go along with this?
Well, that's an exactly correct summary. I mean, people say, well, Rob, what do you object to with Tim Scott or the bill? And I say, it's not that I object so much. I just don't think it's going to solve the underlying issues. I mean, if you want to collect data, fine. If you want to have greater diversification and de-escalation, fine. Those are all fine steps. But unless you change the standard of force, unless you allow police officers to be sued for grossly reckless conduct, unless you change the standard that allows more police to be prosecuted for violence, you're not going to solve the problem. So, unfortunately, I think it's an uphill battle in the Senate. The McConnell wanted to just do something, and I think it's going to be an uphill battle to convince them that we need structural change, and that's why we need the continued mobilization. I will say that people say, well, what did all the protests accomplish? I will say it changed the Democratic Party. I mean, there were only 22 people or so on my bill with Lacey Clay to change the standard of force. It was tough to get presidential candidates on it. I mean, Bernie was for it, but, it wasn't something that people were very vocal about. And now 231 Democrats voted for it. So at least it shifted the Democratic thinking.
That's great. That's great. Step by step. Okay, let's pick up our phone calls here. Dan in Naperville, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. Listen, I got a question, and it is basically this. Why is there no requirement for full financial disclosure for people running for federal office? I have a president right now who, as far as I know, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vladimir Putin, LLC. Why is there no requirement for full financial disclosure?
Dan, there is. I mean, I fill out my financial disclosure forms every year. In fact, I have to disclose not just my assets, but also my wife's. And I'm almost positive that you have to do that as a candidate. Now, maybe you don't have to disclose your spouse as a candidate, but you almost certainly have to disclose your own. I mean, I remember filling out financial disclosure forms as a candidate. So I would just check to make sure they're actually complying with the law.
Tom in St. Paul, Minnesota. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Well, thank you for taking my call. Keep up the good work. I'm calling because I don't think that Trump is going to be the candidate for the Republicans, and I don't think we're going to know who is going to be the candidate for the Republicans until he pulls his fast one at the Republican convention. So he's going to say, oh, I did twice as much in half the time. I was the best president, right to his grave. I was the best president that ever lived. And just to avoid that, narrative, that public story, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, if you impeach him for conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, you can see that, you can have two instances for every day that he was in office where he violated that basic military code that if you have a character that is so morally bad, you can't lead other people. You can't lead troops. And so just say he's totally dysfunctional, but just say, his conduct is terrible.
Yeah. Let's let Congressman Khanna respond to your point, Tom. I think you've made your point a couple of times here. Congressman?
Well, I appreciate the point, and I guess here's why I'm skeptical that he's going to withdraw. He faces potentially criminal prosecution if he's no longer a president, and that's not because Biden or Democrats are going to call for it. That's just the course the law, independent investigations by U.S. attorneys and others will take. And I think he is partly desperate to win so that he can get past the 5-year statute of limitations and avoid those consequences. So I'm not saying you may be right, but his fear of prosecution may trump his a fear of his own self-esteem.
Yeah, there was an op-ed, I think it was in the Financial Times this morning, speculating that he might defer to Pence in exchange for basically a pardon, a Jerry Ford kind of situation. We got 10 seconds left. What do you think?
I mean, that I think is possible, but I don't think he thinks Pence could win. So maybe he would do it if he loses and resigns. So Pence could pardon him. Right before that, I could see.
Yeah, interesting stuff. 15 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Our national town hall meeting with Congressman Khanna.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at RepRo, R-O, Khanna. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Tom, for keep educating us all about things on our lives here. But I wanted to make a comment about or urge, perhaps we need to urge all Americans to vote by mail, something that Republicans are trying to impede voters to do so. And I also wanted you to comment on the Trump appointing this Clooney to the United States Postal Service to be in charge of, and if that could be a threat to voting by mail. Thanks.
Well, I completely agree with you. There's a nonprofit group that is working on making sure that we're educating African American, Latinx, and younger voters on vote by mail. I mean, it's not just, we have two challenges. One is the legal challenge and the structural challenge where Trump and Republican governors in certain states are going to try to do everything to minimize vote by mail. Then we have the cultural challenge, which is that a lot of our voters are not used to voting by mail, that they are used to going to the polls. And how do we educate them about the process? And the second is as important as the first.
James in Hollywood, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Greetings, Professor and Congressman. Bill Barr deserves to be behind bars. He's destroying the rule of law in the USA. Can you begin a full investigation? Only Congress can investigate him, and please begin impeachment. My wise professor said he must be removed. He must, and begin impeachment of Bill Barr, and remind Barr and all Trumplicans Nixon's AG went to jail.
James, I appreciate that, and my understanding is Steve Cohen is on the Judiciary Committee, is drafting up articles of impeachment. I do think someone from the Judiciary Committee will. And you're right to point out that while in our history presidents usually don't go to jail, cabinet members don't have that same grace period, and a lot of them do end up in jail. A number of them have. So I do think a lot of his conduct is illegal, and the Judiciary Committee should be very aggressive. And I think Steve Cohen is coming out with something.
May he be visited by John Mitchell's ghost. Dwayne in Petaluma. We just have a minute, Dwayne, to the break. You got a quick one?
Yes. For financing the pandemic response, both currently and in future, I don't understand why the Democrats didn't call for a Roosevelt-style bank holiday where all the mortgages would be covered by the Federal Reserve and rents would be deferred or postponed, or canceled, so that people would have their housing. And this seemed to me a far better solution than paying people temporary unemployment or sending them a $1,200 check. It transfers to the cost to the people who actually cause the problem.
Right. Let's get the Congressman's thoughts on that,
border
Dwayne.
People.
Thank you.
Dwayne, I think we need a far bigger response. I mean, I've proposed $2,000 a month of checks to folks. I've proposed that we need to help people with rent, and we ought to be able to spend this money in it with low interest rates and low inflation.
Yeah. Thank you. Congressman Khanna is with us. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the state of California, the 17th District in the U.S. House of Representatives, taking your calls for the hour in our National Town Hall meeting with Congressman Khanna right here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Congressman Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Robert in Land of Lakes, Florida. Robert, you are on the air.
Yes, good afternoon, Tom. Good afternoon, Congressman. My question is NASARA, the National Economic Security and Recovery Act, really a legitimate law, or is it phony baloney?
Which law is this?
NASARA, the National Economic something Security Act, NESERA?
Yeah, I mean, I can look into that in terms of if you know what the substance of it is. Often I don't know by top of my head the name. But if you write for our office, we'll be responsive.
Okay. Jan in Shoreline, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Hi, Representative Khanna. I am just irate at the cost of that people are having to pay to get tested for COVID. And I recall when Katie Porter questioned Dr. Redfield about 42 CFR 71.30, which is a public health emergencies, that the CDC will pay for all testing and treatment of any public health emergency, and he agreed to that. And I'm wondering, why isn't that happening? What do we need to do about it to get it so that people aren't having to pay? Tom mentioned yesterday somebody getting a bill for $3,000 for testing.
Yeah, HHS announced yesterday, too, that insurance companies don't have to pay for that.
They shouldn't be getting billed for testing. The problem is that when they go in, they often have other things that you have. I mean, if you have symptoms, it's not just the testing, and they're getting billed for all of the other aspects of it. And that's why we need to say that we should cover health care during this pandemic. It's a health care crisis. Make sure everyone is covered for their health care during this crisis. And that is something that progressives have been pushing for, and we haven't been able to get it as part of the relief bills.
David in Columbus, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Congressman. There was good news for progressives with the recent election. There was a major defeat of a long-term congressman in New York, pending another defeat in Kentucky of another potential conservative Democrat. Will the Democratic leadership see this and change, or will we have new Democratic leadership, or will the Democratic leadership try to fight this? I would like to know your opinion.
David, I think they're going to fight it anytime there's an incumbent involved or anytime there's one of their candidates involved. I mean, I beat an incumbent to get into Congress, and as you know, so many of the folks, AOC, Jamal Bowman, but the policy is just default. The party's rallies around incumbency. That said, it's encouraging that you're seeing this generational change of more women, more people of color, more progressives getting elected, and I definitely think that's the future of the party. But it would be naive to think that you aren't going to have a fight back. I mean, it's going to have to be earned and fought for to bring this change.
Rick in Irwin, Tennessee. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
I was watching Financial Channel yesterday, and they brought up Andrew Yang and the guaranteed basic income, and they said that the banks liked them checks we got, and the reason was because people were paying their mortgages, and they didn't have to foreclose as much. And I was wondering, like, between the HEROES Act and that last $1,200 check we got, maybe we could turn this into something a little more lasting.
Well, Rick, I agree with you. I mean, there was a study today that it came out that said consumer confidence was up in May, but they said that the biggest reason the consumer confidence was up was because of the stimulus check and because of unemployment benefits. And that effect is going to run out. I mean, unemployment benefits run out July 31st, and we've only had one stimulus check. I've said it has to be every $2,000 every month. And so this is not just hurting families. It's important to understand this is going to hurt our economy. It's going to mean consumer spending is going to go down, and our economy is all based on consumer spending. So Trump's policies, the Republican policies, aren't just inhumane for workers. They're actually bad for our economic recovery.
Joe in Minneapolis, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. It's kind of long here. I'll try to keep it as short as I can. I have a question. If I break the law and skip the country to try to run out the statute of limitations, if I understand right, if I come back in, they should still charge me with the law, with the crime? And if that can't that be applied to the president? If he's in office, you can't charge him with anything, but then the clock stops until he gets off the office, then the clock starts again?
Great question.
My understanding is that the clock is still running for the statute of limitations while he's president, though I imagine that that's a question that would go up to the Supreme Court. And one could make the argument that the inability to prosecute him while president should toll the statute of limitations. It's a great question. I don't know if it's been decided or ever litigated.
Yeah, or if it's a very specific law that prohibits that. We have 45 seconds till we're going to hit the break here at the bottom of the hour. What are your thoughts on the fate and future of Donald Trump's prosecution after he gets out of office? And is that even going to happen? It's never happened to a president before.
I think there's a real possibility around him and his family. I certainly think it will be investigated. I don't think anyone will be calling for it, but I think it's a real possibility.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. Although, as much as I cringe at this is something banana republics do, right? They prosecute the last guy who was in office. What's her name in Brazil? Lula, or his name. Lula's case in point. Anyhow, Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, taking your calls for the hour. We will be back in our National Town Hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program with more of your calls for the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Ro Khanna's website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House.
book today is The 31-Day Food Revolution, Heal Your Body, Feel Great, and Transform Your World by Ocean Robbins, with a foreword by Joel Furman, MD. This is from the introduction. Let me call it like it is. We live in a toxic food culture. It's led us to epidemic rates of obesity, heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, and Alzheimer's. Things have gotten so bad that most people think it's normal to have at least a few extra pounds around the middle, to depend on an ever-growing supply of prescription medications, and to lose a little more memory and mobility with every passing year. This may be typical, but it sure as heck doesn't have to be normal. Eating food is mandatory, but suffering from brain fog, living with ever-declining health, and feeling like crap are not. The fact is that right now, hundreds of millions of people are hurting from diseases that never, ever needed to happen in the first place. Dangerous changes have been made to our food supply in just the last 25 years that impact how your food is grown and processed and how safe it is to eat. The status quo is driving small farmers out of business, forcing animals to live in deplorable conditions, and producing food that's making us sick. The medical industry and the processed food industry are earning trillions of dollars in a system that's devastating lives and threatening the very future of life on our planet. It's my mission to help put an end to this madness by sharing the truth about food and helping eaters put it into action. That's why I founded the 500,000-plus member Food Revolution Network, and it's why I wrote the book you now hold in your hands. In some ways, I might seem like a pretty unlikely food revolutionary. After all, in 1953, my grandfather, Irving Robbins, joined with his brother-in-law, Bert Baskin, to found the 31 Flavors ice cream company, Baskin-Robbins. In case anyone on the planet missed the memo, we're now pretty clear that ice cream is not a health food. But back in the 1950s, as my grandpa was pumping out delicious flavors by the dozen, not much was known about the connection between food and health. Up until then, most people seemed content with 3 flavors, vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. My grandfather was a consummate entrepreneur, and he set his heart on offering consumers many more options, 31 to be exact, one for each day of the month. My dad, John, grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool. Sometimes he even ate ice cream for breakfast. He was groomed from early childhood to one day run the family company. My dad's youthful innovations included Jamocha Almond Fudge, one of our company's most iconic flavors to this day, and the rollout to all the stores of the famous pink spoons that enabled customers to enjoy free samples. But in 1967, my grandpa's brother-in-law and business partner, Bert Baskin, became very ill. His doctors informed him he was dying of heart disease. I never knew my great-uncle Bert because he passed on a short time later, 6 years before I was born. But I do know that he was one of the greatest entrepreneurs in American history. He had tremendous wealth, a business he enjoyed, and a family he loved. And he ate a lot of ice cream. And in the end, he lost his life and his health at the age of 54. Grandpa Irv was faced with a choice. He could sell the company for a large sum of money, or he could keep the company in the business and take on my dad, then about to turn 20, as a business partner. Grandpa Irv chose to invite his son aboard. But my dad declined his father's invitation, walking away from Baskin-Robbins and from any access to or dependence on the family wealth. For him, it was a choice for integrity, and it's a choice I've always respected. My dad had seen ice cream bring smiles to a lot of people, but he also knew that unhealthy foods could fuel devastating consequences, and he didn't want to spend his life selling a product that might contribute to more people suffering and dying before their time. So he left a path that was practically paved with gold and ice cream to follow his own rocky road. My dad had suffered from polio as a child and grew up frequently fatigued and ill. In the 1960s, he fell in love with my mom in Berkeley, and the two of them set out on a healthy living path. They stopped eating processed foods, they gave up ice cream, and they based their diets on vegetables and whole natural foods. As my dad's health and energy returned, he and my mom moved to a remote little island off the coast of British Columbia, Canada, where they built a one-room log cabin, grew most of their own food, practiced yoga and meditation for several hours a day, and named their kid Ocean. They say that they almost named me Kale. I'm glad they took the more conservative route on this one. In any case, we did eat a lot of kale, along with cabbage, carrots, onions, broccoli, turnips, Swiss chard, and many other vegetables that my parents grew, plus brown rice, sprouts, buckwheat, and beans. For a treat, once in a blue moon, we'd have a few drops of organic blackstrap molasses. I think we went through about a bottle a year. Though my childhood diet was Spartan and my family lived on very little money, I grew up feeling rich in health. I became an accomplished distance runner, completing my first marathon at the age of 10. My dad went on to study the impact of food choices and to share what he was learning. His landmark bestsellers, including Diet for a New America, inspired millions of people and helped to galvanize the modern health food movement. The media was tickled by the notion of a would-be ice cream heir becoming a healthy eating spokesperson and called him the rebel without a cone and the prophet of nonprofit. Tens of thousands of people wrote my dad letters, often by hand, sharing how his work had changed, sometimes even saved their lives. One of the lives his work impacted, as fate would have it, was that of my own grandpa Irv. Now, my grandpa had been pretty mad when my dad walked away from the ice cream company. He and my dad went years without speaking. But then something remarkable happened. In 1989, Grandpa Irv, then in his early 70s, was suffering from diabetes, heart disease, and weight problems. He'd always eaten the modern diet with a double scoop of ice cream on top. His cardiologist told him he didn't have long to live unless he changed his diet. And then the good doctor handed him a copy of my dad's book, the book 31-Day Food Revolution by Ocean Robbins.
This week on The Science Revolution, about that happiness. Is it time to stop being so careful? Is spontaneity the key to happiness? Professor Janice Brainy is here on plastic rain pouring down in our national parks and everywhere. Tony Corbo with Food and Water Watch drops by to warn Americans the USDA is trying to outsource chicken processing to China and what that means. Tune in wherever you find podcasts.
We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com.
Shay?
Yes, sir.
Oh, you are on the air.
Good afternoon, Tom. Good afternoon, Representative Rose Khanna, and to everyone listening. I'm calling because I wanted to know if the Democratic Party is attempting to align themselves with surrogates, people who have the same vested interests, such as the Poor People's Campaign with repairs of the breach, Dr. William Barber. And also, I wanted to say this, not to be critical, but are the Democrats really at the party level really understanding what type of fight we're in for? Because we're not seeing the type of energy that we need in order to mobilize. People are energized, but we want to see more than what we're seeing from the top. For instance, why is it that the promised second tax cut from Trump in the 2018 election, why has that essentially been fulfilled through 3 stimulus packages? Because that added up to 84% or 84 cents out of every dollar going to the wealthy. Why would you agree to even to any package without saying we need mortgage and rent forgiveness, we need medical tests covered, and we need total transparency as to where this money is going? why are the corporations still being bailed out? I'd rather you not make any deal with the Republicans. Let them know that they do not hold all the power, that you're fighting for the American people. So I just want, to kind of let that kind of permeate the airwaves.
Got it.
Thank you so much.
Shay, let's let him answer. Thank you.
Well, Shay, I appreciate that. First of all, I share your admiration for Reverend Barber. I mean, he's a real hero in what he's doing in the Deep South to build a coalition between the white working class and Black Americans and Brown Americans, and bring people together around an agenda of economic justice, and explain that racism has hurts poor whites as well. I mean, obviously it hurts blacks and brown people the most, but it also hurts poor whites. I think he's brilliant, and many of us in Congress listen to his wisdom. On having more fight, I agree with you. I mean, we needed to push back more on things like the bailouts to these corporations, the PPP program. Well, we were in a tough place because people were really hurting. We wanted to get the unemployment extension. We wanted to get the stimulus checks, and we were forced to swallow some bitter pills to make sure that we could do that. But I do agree that we need to be stronger in fighting back and fighting for free, for rental assistance, for mortgage assistance, the policies you advocate.
Tom in Aurora, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Congressman. My question is almost similar to what we just talked about. It's with the high unemployment numbers, we are facing massive foreclosures coming to millions, literally, families. How are we going to protect them? Why are the banks getting the bailout, but the families who are losing their homes, footing the bill?
Well, Tom, I agree with you. I mean, Tim Ryan and I, right when the crisis started, proposed $2,000 a month for every American family, and that it should last for at least 6 months through the crisis, and that this would allow people, if you have $4,000 as a household, you'd be able to use that money to pay rent. You'd be able to use that money to put food on the table, whatever you needed. I mean, this is if we can afford to be bailing out the banks, if we can afford to be bailing out the corporations, why can't we afford to bail out the working class, the middle class in this country?
Ann in Sarasota, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thanks, Tom and Representative Khanna. I just heard that the Republicans are attempting to destroy the Volcker rule, that they are going to allow depositors' money to be used for their gambling casino, business that they did in 2008. We know what happened then, and also that they're going to not have to provide as much liquidity to the banks. So that sounds really bad, and I'm wondering what are the Democrats doing, if anything, to stop this, because this would just be another disaster added on to all the disasters that are already going on.
And there is no way the House of Representatives is going to allow them to take away some of the protections that Dodd-Frank had. I mean, the idea that banks should be allowed to speculate with money is just going to lead to an even worse crisis. And it doesn't surprise me the Republicans want to do that, because their interest is just trying to jack up the stock market as much as they can and try to artificially show some inflation of value on Wall Street. But the Democratic House would never go along with that.
Kurt from Cali in Beverly Hills, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, Tom, and hello, Congressman Khanna. Thank you for taking my call. First, I want to thank you, along with the other Democratic representatives, for all that you've done so far in getting the CARES Act and the PPP passed, because I shudder to think where this country would be if we still would have had a Republican-controlled House and Senate. I highly doubt that any of this assistance would have occurred at all, so thank you very much. But now my question is this, though. Even though our credit card companies are allowing us to skip payments, spoke a little bit last week about the debt bubble that they're still building on us. And in my effort to try to get ahead of the interest I'm being charged, I made a substantial 4-figure payment to a credit card company that will remain nameless, but they begin with a C and with an I. And instead of giving me the available credit that I deserve and allowing me to get my FICO score down so I can qualify for a refinance and get myself, resituated with a new loan on my home and pull some cash out, they swiped my available credit. And I'm sitting here now with $150 in my savings account.
Well, Kurt, I feel for you, and I think it is wrong. We can look into your...
Congressman, it sounds like you're on a speakerphone and distant from it. We can hardly hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you need to get right close to the microphone.
I don't know what happened there. We need to pass a legislation. We need to pass a bill that will restrict credit card companies from going after debt and suspend any of the interest rate, and that ought to be part of the coronavirus relief. So if you write to us, we can see what we can do in your individual case or put you in touch with your member of Congress. But I agree with you that Congress needs to have this as part of its relief. It's crazy that people are accumulating debt, and even if they're not paying, that debt is piling up, and that's going to destroy families.
We just have 35 seconds to a break. Do you see any kind of comprehensive re-regulation of the banks, the equivalent of rolling back the or returning to Glass-Steagall or those kinds of things?
I think it's definitely on the table in terms of Glass-Steagall, which made sure that banks couldn't speculate and that they had to have greater deposits. I think one thing, though, that we really could do is to require companies to have a cash reserve to be able to make payroll for a few months. I mean, the idea that these companies were unable to make payroll 2 weeks into the crisis and were engaged in stock buybacks, I find unconscionable.
Yeah, absolutely. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He represents the 17th District of California, the Silicon Valley area. He also is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Khanna.house.gov on the website side. On Twitter, it's Rep. Ro Khanna. And welcome back. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good morning, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Happy Town Hall Friday and Anything Goes Friday. Hope you guys are well. Congressman Khanna, as you've said, the enhanced unemployment benefits have kept the bottom from falling out for 40 million something Americans. So it's no telling how ugly things will get if the Republicans let that expire at the end of July. But my question today centers around a federal jobs guarantee. A few days ago, HuffPost had an excellent piece titled "Millions Are Unemployed, Crises Abound. Is it Time to Guarantee Public Service Jobs?" And it's essentially an interview with the economist Pavlina Cherneva, who says this would be merely following through on FDR's long ago promise of a job for every American who wants one, something that seems like would be hard for the Republicans to go against. They're always, they want people to work. So, Congressman Khanna, I say we could tax 100% of wealth over $5 or $10 billion to help finance it. What do you think? Is there anyone talking about this? Seems like it would be a great policy for Joe Biden's platform.
Well, I definitely think there are people talking about a strong public works program and a strong jobs program, and that includes strong spending on infrastructure. It includes a digital works program where we can hire people to do digital jobs. It includes building out broadband. The government really can invest in many ways to put people back to work, and it includes clean technology. And so what I would focus on is how does the government make the investments to get people back to work.
Steve in Topanga, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. My big worry is that the strategy for the Republicans are going to not certify a couple of states, so the vote gets thrown back to the House, what Thomas talked about a lot. What's the strategy on the Democrats to do monitoring, and what can we do to protect the votes and make sure that it comes off fair and it gets certified? Because I really believe that's the plan to keep Trump in. Anyway, I'll take my answer off the phone. Thanks, guys.
I appreciate that, and I agree with you and Tom that that's the concern. When people say, Trump's not going to voluntarily leave office, I don't think that's the issue. I mean, remember that in 2016, the House and Senate certified the election, and I do think whoever the House or Senate certifies will be deemed the winner. That my concern is not that if Biden is certified the winner, that Trump doesn't leave. My concern is what you pointed out. What if states like Wisconsin, Florida, say that there was fraud, and it's a close election of a few percent, and they refuse to certify, it gets kicked to the House, and the House doesn't vote by individuals, they vote by states, and the Republicans control more states. That is the scenario that keeps me up at night, that I'm most concerned about, and that's why we need to really fight for decisive wins. What Pelosi says is we got to win by more than 5 points in these states.
Yeah, and overwhelming. I mean, that was the Tilden Hayes election in 1876, and that's what killed Reconstruction. You're the first elected official I've heard who agrees with me that this is probably the biggest threat to our elections, Congressman. I'm so glad to hear that.
I do. You're a bigger student of history than me, but I think that the more people need to study the House of Representatives. I don't think people realize that it's not just the vote of who has more members, that it's a state-by-state vote.
No, it's actually happened. Sam Tilden got more votes, both electoral and popular, in 1876, and yet Hayes became president. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we have a brand new video up at thomhartmann.com for the people who are subscribers or supporters to our program. And this one's about national health insurance and why and how we really need a single-payer national health care system, whether you call it Medicare for all, or you call it single-payer, or you call it whatever. Medicare for all, it has a lot of appeal because, generally speaking, Medicare is positively viewed. That's what they call it in Canada. It's called Medicare. And, which makes sense, care for people using medicine. We would save at least $150 billion a year just on billing. You've got hospitals in the United States that have entire floors devoted to billing. Hospitals in Canada have one desk with, one or two people sitting at that desk, handling the billing. It's just crazy. And people would get better care. They get more comprehensive care. Our entire nation gets healthier. And there's a whole bunch of essentially bullet points to build this argument for Medicare for all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out right now. Congressman Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Jim in Long Branch, Texas. Jim, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. The last week, the temperatures inside the Arctic Circle have been at 100 Fahrenheit and over. And even with COVID, the reduction in CO2 is going to be only a few % worldwide. And after that, it's going to increase because everybody wants to start the economy. That it's time to move in large numbers to eco-sustainable communities with a universal green income and reduced footprint with a modified FDR eco-sustainable plan. Will the congressman support something like that? Peace.
Jim, first of all, I agree with you that there's a huge crisis that we have over 100 degrees at the Arctic. It's not gotten nearly enough news because we've got so many other crises of coronavirus and, of course, the racial injustice, but we ought to be tackling that. And one of the things I read is that the quarantine in some ways has reduced our carbon footprint. So we know that a lot of the
our actions can actually make a huge difference. And I think we have to have a sustainable plan, an investment in renewable energy, an investment in energy efficiency, and standards that we make sure we get to the 400 parts per million goal that the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change outlined.
Robert in Greenville, North Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. I'd like to know about that $500 billion that they don't want to let us know what they do with it. When we're supposed to have transparency, that's a lot of money. It's $500 billion.
Yes, sir. It's worse than that. It's not just that they aren't letting us have transparency on the $500 billion that's Mnuchin's fund and to go to corporations, is that they're not giving us transparency on the PPP loans either, which is about $600-700 billion and has gone to businesses across this country. I believe some of those have been private equity firms. I believe some of those have been multimillionaires who have gotten some of these funds, and they should disclose who got the funds. I mean, if they did it legitimately, fine, but they are shielding these people who went and got these funds while small businesses, true small businesses, didn't. We need more disclosure.
James in Fayetteville, Arkansas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Thank you for taking my call. My question would be with regard to student loan debt forgiveness. My wife and I, it feels like we've been paying it off for 5 years now and about $80,000 knocked down, but still have about $20,000 left to go. And my question would be, if Biden does win, what does the timeline look like for, getting that on the table, and kind of what do you see as the path forward?
James, I sympathize. I had taken out over $100,000 of student loans. I was fortunate and have done well and been very lucky to not have that a burden. But there was a year in my life where I had to go on forbearance, and I couldn't pay the payments, and the interest just kept accumulating. I'm optimistic we will get some relief. I know Joe Biden supported Senator Warren's proposal for $10,000 of relief in the HEROES Act, the coronavirus. We couldn't get that in the House bill, but I believe if he's president, we will get some form of student relief, debt relief.
Al in Zanesville, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello. I know mail voting is more efficient, can be safer. However, like in Georgia, when they were late sending it out, heat, humidity, sealed return envelopes created messes that couldn't be resolved because of the timing. What sort of safeguards do we have in place that this isn't repeated around the country?
Well, that is my concern. I have two concerns with this election. I have three concerns. One is that we don't get complacent. I mean, this race is going to tighten. I don't think it's going to be a 12-point race when we come into September, October. Two, what you're saying, that the absentee ballots aren't going to go out, that people aren't going to fill them out, that the polling places are going to be restricted. All of that, I think, is going to lead to a outcome where even if Joe Biden is up, the margins will be close enough for these states to contest them, and they will try to throw this to the House of Representatives where we could lose the election. That is the only path that I see of Trump really winning at this point, and I think that's what he is counting on.
It's remarkable. 1 month before the election of 1988, Michael Dukakis was 17 points ahead of George Herbert Walker Bush. In the 15 seconds we have left, sir.
Was that 1 month? Yeah, well.
I thought so. It was in the Axios newsletter this morning. They said just weeks before, so I thought it was a month out. But in any case, what should we be watching as we go into the next week?
Well, we just passed the Police and Violence Act. I think the Democrats, we need to have an economic agenda that talks about getting $2,000 a month to Americans, making sure that we have a real public works program to hire people back, making sure we're dealing with rent and mortgage. I think whoever is going to be better positioned for November is who's going to have an economic message. Trump's message is reckless. The inability to deal with coronavirus is what's hampering the economy. We need to offer an alternative.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events, events, that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com.
We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario, for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea, might play out. The adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And we'll get back to Anything Goes Friday in just a moment. I often reference David Sirota's newsletter, Too Much Information, TMI, that you can find over at his website. I believe it's davidsirota.com or sirota.substack.com. We'll verify that in just a second. But this morning he had an absolutely brilliant piece about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has been getting all this publicity. Oh, look at this, they saved DACA. Well, actually they didn't. And oh, look at this, they saved trans rights. Well, sort of. But really what they're up to is getting almost no publicity, and I thought that this was really something worth talking about. So on the line with us is David Sirota, the journalist. He was previously a senior advisor and speechwriter for Bernie Sanders. At one time, he was one of my colleagues in Progressive Talk Radio. Known David for many, many years. One of the really good guys out there. You can tweet him at David Sirota, Sirota. David, welcome back. And first of all, what website is best for people to go to find your newsletter?
They can go to my website, davidsirota.com.
Okay, cool. So your piece today was titled "The Supreme Court is a Corporate Star Chamber." You might want to remind us what the Star Chamber was and then fill us in.
Yeah, the Star Chamber is like a colloquial term, I guess, or a historical term of a panel of judges that basically meets out justice in secret. And, essentially the Supreme Court, it's not exactly in secret, but it is defending corporations and billionaires in an historically unprecedented way. And I think that I say it's in quasi-secret because it gets very little attention, as you alluded to. I mean, there's a lot of focus on social issues at the Supreme Court. There were rulings last week about anti-discrimination and the DACA program. Good rulings that progressives cheered, but at the same time, rather ignored were decisions that exemplified how the court is constantly strengthening and fortifying the power of corporations and billionaires. Last week, in the last 10 days alone, you've had a decision to limit the SEC's ability to punish financial criminals. You had a pension ruling in which basically the court made it easier for financial firms to steal workers' pension retirement money. And then you had a ruling that essentially strengthened energy companies' power to steamroll environmental objections to fossil fuel projects. So that's and I want to be clear, that's not an anomaly, and that's the key point here. That the court,
and that's just 1 week.
That's one, right? Exactly. The court is, by looking at a series of records, you can tell that the court is the most pro-corporate court in modern history. And the best way to see that is to look at the amicus briefs filed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is basically the representative for big business in Washington. And you can see how many times the court is agreeing with the amicus briefs filed by the Chamber. And if you look at it that way, you see that the court is the most pro-Chamber of Commerce, a.k.a. most pro-corporate, in the modern history of the Supreme Court.
Right, and by amicus briefs, for people who don't know what we're talking about, when two parties go before the Supreme Court and presumably opposite sides of a decision or of an argument, both sides have the ability to have friends of theirs basically file friend of the court briefs, amicus, friend of the court briefs, that make the argument for one side or the other. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is constantly filing these briefs, even on cases that they didn't bring or they have nothing to do with, to strengthen the arguments that typically in a Republican administration the Solicitor General is making, the administration is making. In a Democratic administration, some right-wing member of Congress or some corporation may be making. And spot on. I wrote a book about this. It was published last year, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. This goes all the way back to the founding of our republic, although in really, really large form. It has been since the 1950s that the Supreme Court has been basically a tool of corporate America and almost singularly responsible for the destruction of, for example, unions in the United States. David, what, in your opinion, can or should Americans do about this, assuming that they understand the problem that we've had? That basically the Supreme Court, with a few notable exceptions, has been a right-wing institution since the founding.
Well, I think there's two things that we can do. One, when nomination fights happen, these nominees and the senators asking them questions have to be pushed to focus in on their corporate record. I noted in the piece that happens almost never happens. It happened one time that I can remember in recent years when Neil Gorsuch, he had sided with a company essentially that fired its worker for trying to not freeze to death in the middle of winter. That came into the national consciousness for about 1 second, which was an anomaly. It usually doesn't come into those issues. Don't come into nomination fights. Gorsuch was confirmed anyway. So that's the first thing. When a Supreme Court nominee comes up, pushing your senator to actually use the opportunity to question and spotlight that nominee's record. The second thing that can be done is, similarly as it relates to Congress, is your senators are voting on judges all the time, confirmation of lower court judges, many of whom often become Supreme Court justices and who are setting precedent at the lower judicial level. And Democratic senators are often voting for Republican judicial nominees. And the Republican project to pack the courts with right-wing corporate ideologues has been a long-running campaign, and Democrats have often gone along with it. And that needs to be, like, when people are talking to their senators or when they see primaries, so Senate primaries, in those discussions and debates, how much those senators are voting for Trump judicial nominees needs to be a much bigger issue.
Yeah, amen. David, we got about 2 minutes until we're going to hit a break here. And, as you know, I subscribe to your newsletter. I get it every day, the TMI newsletter. We're talking with David Sirota, davidsirota.com. What are some of the other issues? Since you're producing a daily or virtually daily newsletter here, you cover a lot of territory. What are the areas that you want to flag for our listeners?
I want people to pay attention to right now to Wall Street's stealth takeover of the federal government. And I know we know that's been going on for a long time, but in the last couple of weeks, the private equity industry, which is an industry that charges high fees, does not deliver great returns for investors, funds Donald Trump and the Republican Party in many cases. They have gotten access to workers' 401k plans. They have gotten their guy in at the SEC. The SEC guy, Jay Clayton, is now being nominated for the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney, which is the top cop on Wall Street. You had the gutting of the Volcker rule yesterday, which allows banks now to funnel even more money into private equity. Private equity is eating our economy alive. It is taking over our government, and I think the American public isn't well aware of what this industry is. It got a little bit of an awareness when Mitt Romney ran for president and Barack Obama spotlighted his work in private equity, but people need to really get their head around what is happening with this particular industry that is taking over corporations, squeezing small businesses, laying off workers, all sorts of environmental degradation. And I don't think the public really understands how important this shift in our economy is. And I've been covering it a lot in the newsletter.
Yeah, it's so bizarre that they can take over a company, force the company to borrow $1 billion, then force the company to pay that back, and then they own the company. I mean, it's insane. David Sirota, TMI is the newsletter. Check it out at davidsirota.com. David, thanks for dropping by. Great talking with you.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with more of your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here, Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Robbie in Portland. Hey, Robbie, what's up?
Matter rallies that have been going on. They're still going on. It was day 30, I guess, was last night from Minneapolis, and there was a vigil here in Portland. But there's about 250 people ultimately at one of the marches. So like some of the people aren't coming out as much, but I did want to encourage to keep people interested in this. I did want to ask for, the participation of it, because ultimately, there has been a lot changed. There's been a lot of officers charged for these killings, and it's because of this support. So I just kind of wanted to remind people, that these marches are still going on here in Portland. You can look up Rose City Justice, and basically, contrary to what you'll see on the news, it is a very organized march. There's a lot of direction involved. We block the roads basically to we have a motorcade. There's stuff to where we don't have to worry about cars coming into this stuff. It's actually very organized. However, at night, that's where things get that. So as far as families goes, it's totally safe during the day. You should participate in the marches. Come out. If you can't come out, watch some live streams. I don't know. Any of it is keeping the the pressure.
And share them with your friends. Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay,
Robbie. Yep, I'm in. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. Grant in Everett, Washington. Hey, Grant, what's up?
My concerns with the environment and our natural resources, and I think a positive way that both the Democrats and Republicans could move forward is by doing a work ethic or effort towards more of a localized agrarian society. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that if we start to dismantle the current system of factory farms, the kind of monopolistic system, break them up, and then also take on the pesticide and seed industry, that we'll have more local farms, and localism is like a really good and healthy thing. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about, but you know, I think
that's absolutely what I'm
that
talking about.
combined with going back to victory gardens, you know, a la World War II, where people, you know, turned their front yards into gardens. You can produce a mind-boggling amount of food in, you know, in a front yard or a backyard.
Yeah, and the community presence that everyone gets to kind of participate in with that, I think would be great. And if they expanded it to jobs, private and government, you know, partnership out in the rural areas, it would benefit those connections among peoples.
Yeah, and the other thing is I'd go after some of these big ag companies. I mean, it was in the 1980s when Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Act against agricultural companies that they started wiping out farmers. And you had Willie Nelson doing Farm Aid and all this to try to save family farms. It was unsuccessful. The family farms, to a large extent, are gone. And now you have people who live in the same house for 5 generations who are now renting that house from, you know, one of the big ag companies and still farming the land, but it's not theirs anymore. Grant, thank you. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Sandy in Sterling, Colorado. Hey, Sandy, what's on your mind today?
Just a quick question about where is the Equal Rights Amendment? I wanted to talk to the congressman, but I didn't get on in time. And then I'll let you go, because the Christian church, the women are subservient to men, and my husband tells me how to vote all the time. He thinks Trump is supreme leader, and I think Trump is supremely bad leader. So I just want to know if it's going to get passed, if it's going to get added before November, or it's been 100.
Yeah, it's not going to get passed this year, Sandy. It gets reintroduced. Well, actually, I think the ERA actually passed, but you know, I'd have to go back and look at this. My recollection is that the ERA actually passed or is about to pass, but that the current version had a 10-year window on it, and it was proposed back in the 70s or 80s. And so the Republicans are arguing, perhaps before the Supreme Court. I'd have to go back and look at the story. It seems like it's been a year since this was an issue, to say whether or not that statute of limitations. Sandy, I'm sorry, I don't have clarity on this. Let me figure out what's going on. And after the break at the bottom of the hour, I'll report here, if that's all right with you. Thank you very much, Sandy. Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. You know, I've been watching Donald Trump deconstruct our democracy now for almost 4 years. But yesterday, when he went before the Supreme Court to strike down the Affordable Care Act during a deadly pandemic, it really troubled me, because I'm beginning to think that he knows he's losing, and he's going to metaphorically burn down the country behind him as he leaves. And I'm afraid he's going to begin to roll back all of the things he didn't get to so far. What do you think?
He already largely has, Carol. He issued an executive order which didn't get anywhere near enough coverage a couple of weeks ago that basically said to all government agencies that because of the coronavirus emergency, you may temporarily or even functionally permanently suspend rules that are, quote, protective. That is to say, they protect Americans from pollution, they protect communities from being poisoned, they, you know, basically anything having to do with protecting American people. So I think we're already there, and I think Donald Trump is trying to burn the country down. And
the other thing the other thing that troubles me too is, because I believe he knows he's losing, that's why he's been using Barr to get him off the hook, so that he won't have to face the Southern District of New York. What do you think about that?
I think that's true too, and I think that's why he got rid of first Preet Bharara, and now he's gotten rid of Jeffrey Berman. And for the very simple reason he doesn't want to be prosecuted. We'll see. Audrey Strauss is Berman's number 2. He brought her out of retirement to take that position, and I have a feeling she's not going to take any crap from Donald Trump. And he was just a little too slick by half here. But,
before I go, though, I want to say one thing to you real quickly. My compliments to Louise on that haircut she gave you. You look great.
Well, thank you, Carol. We actually we watched a YouTube on doing precision cuts for men, and then she cut my hair. This is the second or third time she's cut my hair now, and she really did a great job. I agree. Thank you, Carol.
I like it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'll pass that along. Great to hear from you. Daniel in Maywood, Illinois. Hey, Daniel, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I was wondering how you got your hair cut.
Yeah, my wife is a genius. She can do so many different things.
A couple of weeks ago, I was listening to Joy-Ann Reid substituting on one of the MSNBC evening programs, and her guest was filmmaker Michael Moore. Towards the end of the interview, she very cleverly maneuvered him into endorsing somebody for vice president on the ticket. Can you hear me?
Okay, I do.
Yeah, okay. And he mentioned Michelle Alexander. I knew her name because you've been promoting her book as a premium on Free Speech TV. And
the new Jim Crow.
I was pretty amazed at that suggestion, so I checked her out, and I am so impressed. And I wonder what some of your other viewers might think about the possibility of such a wonderfully a great advocate for social justice on the ticket. I know she's not a politician. She's an opinion writer, but she has an incredible background. She's all over YouTube and very accessible for other people to look into her. I just signed a petition on change.org, and one other thing I'll offer up here is that she was being interviewed on C-SPAN and asked whether or not she was endorsing Bernie Sanders. And she said, no, I'm not in a position to endorse a candidate right now, but I would like to endorse Our Revolution, which really added up for me. Group. I got the impression that she was a very solid progressive. And I just wanted to float that idea and maybe get some discussion going.
Yeah. I don't know if that was Michael Moore just trying to very elegantly avoid naming one of the people who most likely will be VP, so it doesn't sound, semi-partisan, at least in that regard. Partisan's not quite the right word. Or if he was just totally serious. Michelle Alexander is one of the more formidable and impressive figures in American history. Her book, The New Jim Crow, about how, the 13th Amendment didn't end slavery and our prison system is now, the basis of it, and our policing system is absolutely brilliant. It has had a huge impact on American political dialogue and discourse. I'm very impressed by her. I would bet money, if I were a betting man, that the nominee is either going to be Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren. And I think the probability is right now Kamala Harris. But we'll see. I think it's going to be one of the two, though. But I've been wrong before. Daniel, thank you for the call. We'll see what shakes out. It's Anything Goes Friday.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls in just a moment here on Anything Goes Friday. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today we're reading from Dorfman and Mallart's book, How to Read Donald Duck, Imperialist Ideology in the Disney Comic. And this is from the preface to the English edition. This book was first published in Spanish. To say that this book was burnt in Chile should not come as a surprise to anyone. Hundreds of books were destroyed and thousands more prohibited and censored. It was written in the middle of 1971, in the middle of the Chilean revolutionary process. Copper had been rescued. The land was being returned to the peasantry. The whole Chilean people were recovering the industries that during the 20th century had been the means of enrichment for Mr. Rockefeller, Grace, Guggenheim, and Morgan. Because this process was intolerable to the United States government and its multinational corporations, it had to be stopped. They organized a plan which at the time was suspected and since has been confirmed by Mr. Kissinger, Ford, and Colby to have been directed and financed by the United States intelligence services. Their objective was to overthrow the constitutional government of Chile. To realize their objective, an invisible blockade was imposed. Credits were denied, spare parts purchased for industrial machinery were not sent, and later the Chilean state bank accounts in the U.S. were blocked, and an embargo preventing the sale of Chilean copper throughout the world was organized. There were, however, two items which were not blocked: planes, tanks, ships, and technical assistance for the Chilean armed forces, and magazines, TV serials, advertising, and public opinion polls for the Chilean mass media, which continued for the most part to be in the hands of a small group which was losing its privileges. To maintain them with those of the U.S., their media prepared the climate for the bourgeois insurrection, which finally materialized some years later on the 11th of September, 1973. Each day, with expert U.S. advice, in each newspaper, each weekly, each monthly magazine, each news dispatch, each movie, and each comic book, their arsenal of psychological warfare was fortified. In the words of General Pinochet, the point was, quote, to conquer the minds, end quote, while in the words of Donald Duck in the magazine Dislandia, published in December 1971, coinciding with the first mass rallies of native fascism, the so-called March of the Empty Pots and Pans, the point was to, quote, restore the king. But the people did not want the restoration of the king, nor of the businessman. The popular Chilean cultural offensive, which accompanied the social and economic liberation, took multiple forms: wall paintings, popular papers, TV programs, motion pictures, theater, songs, literature. In all areas of human activity, with differing degrees of intensity, the people expressed their will. Perhaps the most important arm of this offensive was the work of the state publishing house, Quimantu, a word meaning sunshine of knowledge in the language of the Chilean Machupe Indians. In 2.5 years, it published 5 million books, twice the amount that had been published in all of Chile during the previous 70 years. In addition, it transformed the content of some of the magazines that it inherited from before the popular unity government and created new ones. It is in this multifaceted context, with the people on the march to cultural liberation, a process which also meant criticizing the mass cultural merchandise exported so profitably by the U.S. into the Third World, that How to Read Donald Duck was generated. We simply answered a practical need. It was not an academic exercise. For the Mad Dog Warriors on that September 11th, there were no paintings on the walls. There were only enormous stains which dirtied the city in memory. They, using the fascist youth brigades, whitewashed all the signing, many-colored walls of the nation. They broke records, murdered singers, destroyed radios and printing presses, imprisoned and executed journalists, so that nothing would be left to remind anybody of anything about the struggle for national liberation. But it was not enough to clean these cultural stains from the street. The most important task was to eliminate all those who bore the stain inside themselves: the fighters, workers, peasants, employees, students, and patriotic soldiers, to eliminate these creators of a new life, to eliminate this new life which grew, and for all that we created. This book, conceived for the Chilean people and our urgent needs, produced in the midst of our struggle, is now being published far from Chile in the uncle land of Disney, behind the barbed wire network of ITT. Mr. Disney, we are returning your duck, feathers plucked and well roasted. Look inside, you can see the handwriting on the wall, our hands still writing on the wall, Donald, to go home. This is written in 1975. And then this from David Kunzel's introduction. The names of the presidents changed. That of Disney remains. 46 years after the birth of Mickey Mouse, 8 years after the death of his master, Disney's may be the most widely known North American name in the world. He is arguably the century's most important figure in bourgeois popular culture. He has done more than any single person to disseminate around the world certain myths upon which that culture has thrived, notably that of an innocence supposedly universal, beyond place, beyond time, and beyond criticism. The myth of U.S. political innocence is at last being dismantled, and the reality which it masks lies in significant areas exposed to public view. But the great American dream of cultural innocence still holds a global imagination in thrall. The first major breach into the Disney of this dream was made by Richard Schickel's The Disney Version, The Life, Times, and Commerce of Walt Disney, the book How to Read Donald Duck.
This week on The Science Revolution, about that happiness. Is it time to stop being so careful? Is spontaneity the key to happiness? Professor Janice Brainy is here on plastic rain pouring down in our national parks and everywhere. Tony Corbo with Food and Water Watch drops by to warn Americans the USDA is trying to outsource chicken processing to China and what that means. Tune in wherever you find fine podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. Just a couple of quick stories here that I think you would want to know about. My friend Jim Turr flagged this for me earlier in the week, and I wanted to see how it shook out. There's a restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico called India Palace. And Bajit Singh, it's owned by an Indian family, as in from India. And when he came into work on Monday, this article here from, this is from Daily Kos actually, says he was in shock. His restaurant was completely destroyed with racial slurs covering the walls. White power, go home, and Trump 2020 were painted and spray painted all over the walls, the doors, the counters, and other surfaces. The religious statues were beheaded, items were stolen. He's owned the restaurant for 7 years now. He says the damage is probably more than $100,000. One of the really mind-boggling things is that Bajit Singh, the owner of the India Palace restaurant in Santa Fe, has been preparing weekly care packages with some of his own food and other things for the local homeless. He said, we do a bag full of food and hygiene products, and we throw in cash, typically $5 or $10 into each one of the bags, and they take them out and give them to homeless people. Well, these asses who destroyed this restaurant, spray painting white power and Trump 2020 all over it, stole that stuff. They stole the bags for the homeless. Santa Fe Mayor Alan Weber said this is a sickening and appalling hate crime. New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham shared a similar sentiment. She said, I am absolutely heartbroken and disgusted by this racist attack. We will not stand for such hatred in New Mexico. CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, said, this is Ibrahim Hooper. He's been on our program many, many times. He said, we call on President Trump, whose name was used by the hate vandals, to stop promoting bigotry and division. Right. Yeah, that'll happen when pigs fly. But anyway, they put together a GoFundMe page, tried to raise $50,000 to put the restaurant back together. They hit their goal on Tuesday or Wednesday of this week, and now they're trying to raise a little bit more to actually, over $100,000 worth of damage done, and, plus, funding what they're doing. So just a FYI, particularly if you're in Santa Fe, but I think more generally. And a very troubling story. This was on Raw Story yesterday afternoon. I don't know if it's still up right now. But they've got video of, there was a protest going on in Columbus, Ohio. And on the fringe, on the periphery of this protest, suddenly this black van shows up. I mentioned this briefly yesterday, but I wanted to amplify it. Suddenly this black van shows up. A bunch of guys with guns jump out. They snatch this one guy near whom the van stopped, shove him in the van, and take off. Now, this is what Pinochet used to do in Chile when he would kidnap political opponents and then throw them out of helicopters. We have no idea who this person was who was snatched. I mean, maybe it's been updated since then, but at the moment, I don't have any idea. Or what they did to him or with him. But this is not America. Or maybe this is America, in which case we've got a big problem. Mark Taylor Canfield in Seattle. Hey, Mark, I know you've been reporting on the CHOP on the Capitol Hill region that has kind of declared its independence. I know that the mayor says that she's going to take it apart. You've got bulldozers down the street. What's going on?
Well, at a press briefing on Monday, Police Chief Carmen Best announced that the Seattle Police Department doesn't want to use batons or guns on protesters, but she claims that the city council had, quote, legislated away, unquote, their option of using tear gas, rubber bullets, flashbang grenades, and other crowd control weapons. So even though she's under a court temporary injunction and also a city council ban, she asked for the reinstatement of those devices in an attempt to remilitarize the police department. Mayor Jenny Durkan announced that the SPD will reoccupy the abandoned East Precinct where the protesters have held vigils 24/7 for several weeks now, about 16 or 17 days. Folks have been marching to the West Precinct every day. They've been blocking.
Now, this is in the wake,
night.
Mark, of 2 people getting shot in there.
Actually, 4 people. One guy drove his car into the protest wielding a weapon, shot one man. 2 other people were shot in as what looks like a random act of violence, and then a 4th man was shot. He just spoke from the hospital the other day, says that he was attacked by white supremacists. But Best and Durkan have used this scenario that Trump was using, that this is a very dangerous place, to crack down. And so they say they're going to clear it out. Now, this morning, the DOT trucks, the Department of Transportation trucks, showed up to remove the concrete barriers which the city actually had put in front of the police department, and protesters laid down in front of the front loader and refused to let them do that. So the latest is that the city has given the protesters 72 hours to figure out what they want to do and how to organize themselves. And I was down there yesterday at the General Assembly, Tom, and folks started talking about wanting to – they have a list of demands. Obviously, they want to defund the Seattle Police Department by 50%. They want to use that money to fund black and brown communities that have been redlined in Seattle. And they want all charges dropped against protesters who have been arrested. Now, City Attorney Pete Holm, who's a very progressive kind of guy, he says he probably will drop those charges. Teresa Mosqueda and the city council president Lorena Gonzalez say they're behind, and Shama Swan are behind defunding the police department by 50%. But those demands have not been met yet. They've also asked for the resignation of Jenny Durkan for failing to rein in the police. And the big thing, they want to turn the East Precinct into a community center. And that's got a long history in Seattle. The Central Area Motivation Program is an old fire station that black activists occupied and turned into a community center. El Centro de la Raza, the Latino community, took over that building, occupied it, got the city to turn on the lights and water, turned it into a community center. The Daystar Tribal Center and the African American Heritage Museum both were gained by people occupying those spaces until the city finally gave them the property. So that's the plan at this point at CHOP, but people are organizing right now to figure out how they're going to get this done. Meanwhile, the police department and the mayor seem to be completely unrepentant after more than 15,000 complaints were filed against them during these protests. But you won't hear that addressed by the mayor or Carmen Best, because unfortunately they've kind of adopted Fox News and Sinclair Broadcasting and Donald Trump's political dialogue about all this, saying that it's a dangerous place and needs to be cleared out. There has been no violence there over the last 3 or 4 nights.
It's going to be a long weekend. It's going to be a long weekend. Mark, thanks for the report. Jim in Long Beach, Texas. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. The temperatures inside of the Arctic Circle have been over 100 Fahrenheit for the last week or so, as you probably already know. And I think it's time that we move to eco-sustainable communities with a FDR modified green plan, with a universal green income, not a basic income. Basic income is just business as usual. So we need to move in large quantities into eco-sustainable communities with regenerative agriculture, no pesticides, no fossil fuels. And I think a lot of people are willing to do that. Just we need a coordination and a plan like that in order to move. Your comments.
I agree. Jim, you said it very well. Tom in Fort Smith, New Hampshire. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Good to talk with you again. I just want to throw in my 2 cents about the VP nominee for Biden. I think he should choose Val Deming. She's got a great background. Well, I mean, it's not just
she's a former police chief, right?
That's right. She's got a long law and order background, and also, I mean, where she represents. She's a House rep from Florida, big battleground state. Could conceivably give him a little bit more of an advantage there. It's nothing against the other possibilities. I mean, I think you should make Elizabeth Warren the Secretary of the Treasury, make Kamala Harris the USAG, Susan Rice could be the Secretary of State, and he should get Barack Obama on the Supreme Court. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, except I think if we're going to be putting progressives on the Supreme Court, we need to be taking a lesson from the Republicans and putting on people who are in their 40s or 50s rather than their 60s or 70s. But, in every other regard, I agree. Tom, if, Val Demings is a real long shot here, although she is being vetted by the Biden campaign. If it's not her, who else would you want?
That's a good question. I mean, I've always really liked Elizabeth Warren, but I think probably a better choice. I'm trying to think strategically here. I think Kamala Harris would probably be the next choice. But I think, Val Deming, she's going to become well-known very quickly if she gets nominated. So,
yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a very, very important decision, though, because that person is, in all probability, in 4 years, going to be our next president. Tom, thank you, or at least running for it.
Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I really don't think Joe Biden wants to or will hold on to that position for 8 years. I think he's in there for 4 years, and whoever his VP is, they're going to set it up. And welcome back, James in Seattle. Hey, James, what's up?
Hi, I just wanted to put out that I think that protesters should be next focused and targeted on Fox so-called news and all of the half of the billionaire class that's aligned with the Koch brothers, with all their institutions and foundations. Those things are the things that need to be torn down because they're creating the ideology. They're a poison factory. They're actually manifesting poison in the world besides the squeeze that they put on by these people, the wannabe slave patrolists who are utilizing the Boogaloo Boys as armed, friendly people against unarmed, peaceful protesters. They're in the military, I suppose. I think I heard from you. Not only are they creating false narratives and climate denial, it actually produced this pandemic, this poison. It's physically manifesting, along with this economic depression is caused by this. The whole thing is tied together in this upheaval because we're going through a permanent spiritual change. But I think that the protesters really need to get and take out Fox so-called news and all these institutions because they're literally killing us.
Yeah, I don't think we can take them out, but we need to be calling them out. I'm with you on that. James, you wouldn't want to take them out. James in Spokane. Hey, James, what's up?
I'm running out of tears, you know what I mean? The Trump pox, the many facets of the Trump pox.
Yeah.
You're talking about the big lie the guy's told. I'll tell you, the one that sticks in my mind is that he calls himself a white human because I don't see evidence of either one. I would have to see the DNA. All right. I think a good name for the guy, tribute to George, would be we call the guy Pink Floyd from now on.
Trump?
Pink Floyd would be perfect for the guy.
Why?
According to Roger Waters, Israelis have something to do with the training of our police forces in the USA. including put pressure on the carotid artery with the knee?
Well, I don't know about the carotid artery specifically, but I know that there are police departments who do take training in Israel, which frankly is very troubling. I mean, Israel's an apartheid state that is running an occupied territory along racial lines. And, is that really the lesson we want to be teaching our cops? And the techniques and strategies that they use. I mean, they're not dealing with domestic violence and drunk drivers. They're dealing in some cases with literally terrorism.
And where are they practicing
police function.
their viciousness?
Why are we teaching our cops this?
Thank you, Thom.
Yeah. Thank you, James. It's good to hear from you. And spot on. There is so much wrong with our policing, not just how they're being trained, where they're being trained, how they're being equipped, what our rules are. This is why the House of Representatives just passed this, the George Floyd, I forget the full name of it, but basically police reform legislation that specifically says cops are no longer immune from their own actions. I mean, who else in America is immune from their own actions? Who else in America can kill somebody and say, tough luck, you can't do anything about it? It's bizarre that we even got to this. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we just put up a new video for supporters of our program. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com. Talking about the relationship between Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, and basically the whole right-wing hate agenda on Hispanics, by and large, saying that Hispanics are changing our culture. Really? This is European culture. I mean, the Mayans and Aztecs got replaced by the Spaniards, remember? They're mostly Catholic. I don't see the cultural difference here, but Fox sure does. And also pointing out that Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, calls out Rupert Murdoch and says, he's, quote, a cancer on Australian democracy. Well, apparently a cancer on American democracy as well. So you can check out this new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's just available to people who are, members of, supporters of our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's up?
Well, I just wanted to tell you about a video, a live secret film that was shown on a TV show in the early 2001, 2002 of a military team actually in a Minneapolis police station training the police force there. And what I'm wondering is what kind of choices do the police and the people of this country have when a policeman has to either listen to what they've been taught to do over the years and what the military is training them to do? Who does that leave the American people, the people in the street? Who does it leave them to go to if they have a problem? If there's nobody, like it used to be when you had a problem, you called the police and they could help you. But now it's kind of like a catch-22 for the everyday people of this country, because they're now been made into an enemy, or rather somebody that's a disciplinarian rather than a help. And that film I saw with my own eyes on a show, but this film was taken secretly and shown on TV. And I'm not going to name the guy who had the TV show that it was on. But No, it's all good. Joan, I get what you're saying, and I completely agree. The mission of the military is sometimes
not quite jokingly referred to as killing people and blowing stuff up. That's what we train our military to do. That has nothing to do with, serve and protect. I mean, outside of the military police, that's it. And it is totally wrong, totally inappropriate, totally outrageous that our police departments would be trained by the military. Vic in Stockton, California. Hey, Vic, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Quick question, which I'll take the comments off the air. I used to be a project engineer for many years, and I always was taught to prepare for all eventualities, or as many as are deemed feasible, right, but that could occur. So my question to you, Tom, is, if the Democrats have established 2 game plans, and one obviously is between now and November to defeat Trump, and one game plan, just as important, to prepare for, and I'll call it a barbarians at the gates situation if Trump wins. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, well, I think we do need to prepare for Trump winning, or for Trump gaming the system, or for Trump, and his buddies pulling the 12th Amendment or whatever. I'm totally with you. Sean in Los Angeles. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Hope you're doing well on this Friday. Just wanted to ask you whether or not you think we are past the point of no return now that the country has reopened for any of the governors, especially Governor Newsom in California, to reinstate the stay-at-home orders to combat what is obviously a huge problem.
Yeah. The big problem here, the big tragedy, and it needs to be emphasized over and over and over again in the media. The only show that I've seen that even talks about it in these terms has been the Rachel Maddow show on corporate broadcasting, is that the whole point of shutting a country down, whether it's France, Germany, Italy, or the United States, or South Korea, or China, or pick your country, the whole point of shutting it down is so that you have breathing room for 2 or 3 months to put into place an extensive program for testing and contact tracing, so that when you open it back up, if you have local eruptions, you can immediately smother them. You can put those fires out. And the Trump administration not only completely failed to do that, they actually made it harder to do by refusing to use the Defense Production Act to order the manufacture of more reagents, tubes, swabs, basically test kits. And so you've got, Arizona right now can't do tests fast enough. Texas can't do tests fast enough because they don't have the damn test kits. They should have been provided by the federal government. The Trump administration this goes beyond misadministration. This is maladministration. This is malicious governance. This is organizing things in the United States in such a way that are almost guaranteed to kill people. And Sean, it's such a tragedy, but you're going to have states, governors of states now are facing the choice. Some of them are starting to put aggressive contact tracing and testing into place. Here in Oregon, for example, yesterday, the governor just announced she has 600 people in Oregon who are now state employees to do contact tracing. We're going to do it here. California is putting it into place. But you've got, 3/4 of the United States that is like totally clueless with regard to this, red state governors who don't even know where to begin. And, they're going to have the choice between shutting their state down for another 3 months, 4 months while they put this into place, or just letting this thing burn through and kill another 200,000, another 100, maybe 200,000 American citizens. It's nuts. And not only that, the age of people who are getting really sick and who are dying is now sliding down into the 20s and 30s and 40s. It's like they burned through all the nursing homes. Now it's coming for the rest of us. It's mind-boggling. Anyhow, we'll see you next week. Thank you for being with us this week. Have a great weekend. Be nice to yourself and those around you, please. And tell your friends about where they can find good progressive media. Tag You're It. Have a wonderful weekend.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Bye.